This beaded lattice bracelet is such a pretty design, and it is so versatile. It's beautiful, made in just inexpensive craft store beads. You can also take it up a notch with check fire polish beads, Swarovskis, used tubes. There are so many variations. It's one of those designs where the possibilities are limitless. Hi there, Sandy here. Welcome to another jewelry making video at keepsakecrafts.net. This is one of those kinds of designs that I absolutely love because it's pretty simple to do once you get an understanding of the pattern, and you can change the look so completely just depending on the kind of beads you use. This one is a really pretty design. I haven't finished the ends, I just did the pattern, and it was made with a set of inexpensive beads. There are size 6 seed beads and bugle beads in this box from Michael's, which was $12. With a coupon I paid $6. I pictured doing something like this with a group of young people, like around the holidays, that they could make jewelry for moms and grandparents. I think that would be really cool. For this one, I used 2 different colors of the bugle beads and then 1 color of the seed beads, but you can mix that up as much as you want. Start by cutting 4 10-inch lengths of bead stringing wire. The weight of the wire you use depends on the weight of the beads you use. These are very small, light beads I'm using, so I'm using 0.12 inch or 0.3 millimeter wire. But if you were using heavy beads, then by all means use heavier wire. I've chosen 2 different colors of bugle beads, and I've made them contrast so you can really see what's going on, and a color of seed bead. So start with the long beads. Now you don't have to use long beads. I'll show you a variation later, but it's a way to get a piece of jewelry done fairly quickly. So you'll need the beads that are going to be in your center. You could make your bracelet all one color, but there are all the colors to choose from, so why not use more than one? Now it's good to have an idea of what you are going to use in your findings. I'm going to show you how to finish off one of these bracelets with a spacer bar like this. This will help your pattern spread out and be more visible, keep your layers separated, but you'll want to take some measurements and figure out just how much room this is going to take up. These findings take up nearly 2 inches, so I probably, if I'm making a 7-inch bracelet, I only need about 5 inches of beadwork. But you'll have to measure whatever findings you're using and adjust accordingly. I have a bead clamp on one of my pieces of wire. And you're going to start with one of your, I'm going to call these 6/0 seed beads the crossing beads, because this is where your wires cross. They cross inside these beads. But keep in mind, you can really change the look by changing what you use as a crossing bead. So we'll start with a crossing bead. I'm going to put on 2 bugle beads. I tried it with just 1. And I didn't really like the look. They were just a little too close together. You can also find bugle beads that are longer. And I'll show you an option in a bit with even longer beads, which makes the project go super fast. So a crossing bead and whatever pattern and combination of your long beads you want. And then a crossing bead, and you just alternate. You want to finish with an even number. If you want your bracelet to be symmetrical from end to end, an even number of sets of your long beads. Now I have my 10 sets of long beads strung on, beginning and ending with a crossing bead. I'll put a bead clamp down here. I'm going to leave this loose because it's much easier to do the stringing if they're not held tight. Now I'm going to grab one of my other pieces of beading wire. I'm going to slide that through the crossing bead and clamp it just in the same bead clamp here. Or bead bug, bead holder, bead stopper, whatever you want to call it. Keep it from going anywhere. Now I'm going to do a set of long beads, a crossing bead, and a set of long beads. So whatever your pattern is, in this case it's 2 bugle beads, and these are about 6 millimeter bugle beads. Like I said, you can buy them longer. You definitely want to use beading wire for this and not beading thread, because bugle beads are known for being sharp, and they will cut your thread. I have a few pieces of jewelry I spent a lot of time on years ago when I was a new beader, and they were pretty complex patterns, and I did them in thread, and I'm still trying to figure out how to repair them because the bugle beads just shredded the thread in places. Alright, so here's the pattern. Is a long bead, or your long bead pattern, a crossing bead, and your long bead pattern. Now you're going to skip one of the crossing beads, so that exact same pattern you just made on the other side, skip all of that and send that wire through the next crossing bead. And repeat. So what you'll end up doing is copying your first wire full of beads, except that this wire will go through every other crossing bead. So I'll show you that again. We'll do our long beads. A crossing bead, so we're going to skip this one and add one on of this strand's very own. And then a long bead, and now we have the same pattern here, long crossing long, and now we'll go through this next crossing bead. And as you put this together, you can kind of start to see that lattice pattern starting, but it will become more clear as we add wires through these beads, these crossing beads. So continue until you get to the other end. Okay, I'm nearly done with this middle row, and if you've done it right, your crossing beads should be in a pattern of 1, 2, 1, 2 all the way down, and if you put on an even number of the long beads from the start, then your wire should finish up going through the last crossing bead on the other end. And you can put that in your bead clamp. So this is your center row. Now you can carry on using the exact same beads, but I'm going to use a different color just for some contrast and to show you what's going on, so you can more easily see what's going on. You can also change up the crossing beads. You can get very creative with those. I'll show you more about that in a minute. Now sometimes these containers of inexpensive beads, they won't be very even. Like in this one, I can see there's some really short ones. So I'll probably skip those and not use them and try to use ones that are all about the same length. It helps your pattern to show better if they're pretty close to the same length. Now you'll be using your third piece of wire. Add a bead clamp to the end. And one more time, start with a crossing bead. I don't think that's a bead at all. I think that's a ball of glass. These inexpensive beads, you can see that there's a really long one, and that was one without a hole. But you could still make very pretty jewelry with it. Okay, now I'm going to add my long beads, whatever the pattern is. In this case, 2 6mm bugle beads. And I am going to go through this first crossing bead. Can you see the pattern here? So one that is loose, that only has one wire going through it, is the one I am going to go through here. So this one has 2 wires crossing through it, so I'm going to skip that one. I'm going to do my pattern just like I did in the previous row. Long beads, crossing bead, long beads. I just need to take a minute here while I'm doing this to give a shout out to my patrons. My patrons are awesome. I appreciate you all so much, and you really do make a difference as to whether or not I continue putting videos up on YouTube. So if you like my videos and you want them to continue, you might consider becoming a patron. Not only will you help keep this YouTube channel going, but you also have the opportunity to get up to 2 bonus videos every month. So this is the same pattern I was doing before, and it's really the same pattern again. I'm skipping the next crossing bead, but here it's easy to tell because it's the one that has 2 wires going through it, and I'm going to go through the next one. And repeat all the way down to the other end. When you get down to the end, just like at the beginning here, you will finish with a single grouping of long beads and a single crossing bead. And if you push all of your beads together, so they're all lined up, you see that you should have 2 of each crossing bead now, all lined up. Now you can just flip this over and repeat exactly what you just did to add another row on the other side. So I would add that of the dark blue to finish your pattern. But you don't have to stop with 4 rows. You can keep adding beads the exact same way. You can make your bracelet as wide as you want it to be. To do the 4th and final row, although you can add more, you're going to do it the exact same way you just did this row. Start with a crossing bead and then add 2, or add your long bead pattern. In my case, it's 2 of these long beads. And go through the first crossing bead here because it doesn't have 2 wires through it, it only has 1. So now it has 2. And then add, just the same as you did on this side, your long beads, a crossing bead, your long beads, and go through the next crossing bead that only has 1 wire through it. I've finished adding all 4 rows of my beads, and you'll probably notice that this does not look like this. There's something interesting about this pattern in that it really doesn't emerge until you've snugged up the rows, and then it starts to come out. You know, all the times in videos I've told you don't pull your crimps too tight. Well, in this case, you don't want to crank on them really hard, but actually you do need to snug them up a bit in order for the pattern to emerge. So I've already added crimps to one end, and notice these 2 center ones are crimped together, and we'll be doing that when we finish our bracelet as well. So I'll just slide a crimp over these 2 middle wires. And I'm not finishing the bracelet like this, I'm just doing this to show you how your pattern will work. So I'm going to pull this down, and then I just want to pull on both of those and make sure they're both equally snug. Don't crush your glass bead there. Now I did something here a little different with these blue beads. I made a point of choosing ones that are longer. So you can see that you get a bit of a different pattern here. Well, let me finish snugging these up and then you can see it better. So don't think of this as a mistake. Think of it as a design opportunity. You can have a straight row of lattice like these, where all of these beads are pretty much the same size. You can choose better quality beads and have them all be precisely the same size. So all these ends are crimped fairly snug. Oh, I missed one here. See that? I only put 1 bead there. I was wondering why that one looked different. But I hope you see the idea here, that you can just change a few things. You can change your colors, add more rows. Whatever you do, I strongly suggest you start by making one of these, this top one, just in basic colors so you can follow the design. You could do something like make your beads meander, just have a single color doing this. So you'd really want something like this to follow as a pattern to keep track of what you're doing. Let me show you a few other options. Yeah, and count carefully and double check before you do your crimping because that one's not going to work. Now I mentioned long beads, and you can find these, again, I just found these at Michael's. These are long curved tube beads. I used some 4mm check fire polish beads from Dollar Bead Box as my crossing beads and made this. And I did 5 rows. I would have done one more, but I actually ran out of this size of bead. And isn't that just the coolest thing? I absolutely love it. And this went together super fast because it's only one bead here, just the one long tube bead. So instead of having to string on 2, it went together really fast and is very dramatic and effective. You could even use something like this as a necklace. Let it be collapsed, and it's just suddenly quite beautiful. But using a spreader bar, these will help. Remember that when you add rows, for every 2 rows you add, so you can have 4 rows, you'll need a spacer bar with 3 loops. For 5 rows, you'll need 4 loops, and so on. You don't even have to stop at just 1 or 2 colors. I'm going to show you another bracelet that I've started, and I actually used 4 different colors of check fire polish beads. These are also from Dollar Bead Box. I'll have links to all of these in the description box below, all of the colors I used. But I chose 4 different colors. You can see I'm into blues and turquoise lately, of 3mm beads. And for my bracelet, I used 3 in the place of each of the long beads, and you can see here I used some fancier spacers as my crossing beads. And another thing I did that's a little bit different for this one was I used different beads on the very outside. So here's a couple things to keep in mind if you're going to make those kinds of design changes. Get your beads laid out, like I have these 4 rows here. This is the order I have them in. So you'll start with your center 2, and you'll do them the exact same way. The only thing you have to keep in mind is that when you get to the 3rd row, one of your outer rows, you'll need to pay attention to which row you go into. So I have this opaque turquoise next to these teal ones, and then the more translucent one is on the other side. It will be next to these ones with a little bit of copper on them. So I want to make sure when I put this through that, because these can twist very easily, I want to make sure that I'm always putting it through the same one. Unless you want the look of it twisting and turning, which you could absolutely do, and then it would look like it zigzagged through. You just have to plan that. So in this case, I want this one to go through the ones that are opaque, because I'm just doing 4 rows. I'm not doing any twisting and turning. And then I'll finish it the same with 3 more and another one of my little diamond spacers, or square on point spacers. As far as adding these leaves on the outside, I had to do a little bit of adjusting here in order to do that, because these little squares on the diagonal are 6mm across from hole to hole, but the leaves are smaller than that, and it made these outer rows too short, which is why I just added in some seed beads. And I think it is a really pretty effect. I have 4 additional seed beads in each of these rows, which makes them just a tiny bit longer than these inner rows, so they just, I think it just really enhances the look. So I'll just finish this one, adding my 3. See, when you're doing something like this, one thing that's nice about using the check fire polish beads from Dollar Bead Box or from anywhere is that they are very consistent in size. Unlike those inexpensive beads from Michael's, you can really count on these being the same size throughout your project.
which helps in your planning if you're trying to get something a little bit more precise like this. So there's the end of that row, and now I need to add this row. But think about the other things you could add. I thought I would like these, but I decided I didn't. But you could certainly use top drilled bracelets and have the crystals. Again, make sure with something like this that you're using wire, not thread. You could use something like these. These are really cute. You might have to do a stack of them to get the right size. These are little dragon scale beads. You could even string like a whole row of them on the outside and have it very dimensional. Or just have a couple and then fill in like I did with the seed beads. Kind of any bead that's a fringe bead, which means the hole isn't in the center, it's off to one side. You could use that. These are little riso beads, which are really cute, and they would, like grains of rice, riso. And that would be pretty. I thought of using those as well. I opted to put one of these little square on point beads at all of the ends rather than a leaf, although that would complete the pattern, just because I felt like I didn't want a leaf flopping around up against my spacers here, my spreader. So do whatever works for the findings you have. So we'll start this pattern. It's basically going to repeat this outer row. We'll start with one of these. So I'll only be using these at the beginning and end of this outer row. Like I said, I'm making this outer row just a tiny bit bigger than the inner rows, and I think it just makes it lie a little bit more nicely, because this sort of wants to curl up, but this, even without being pulled snug, is lying nice the way I want it. So I'm going to add one of my seed beads. This is a 11O opaque metallic bronze. And then 3 of my check fire polish beads. Another thing I thought this would be really pretty in is with those squiggly metal tube beads. You have these, which are, are just curved, but I've also seen ones that kind of, they wiggle and squiggle. I thought that would be pretty to use. So I've got my seed bead, my 3 check fire polish, and another seed bead. That's like my long bead pattern. It's actually 5 beads in this case. And now I'm going to go through the crossover bead. Again, the one that only has one wire going through it. This is why you don't want to snug up the rows until you're all done with your bracelet, because it's tough to add this in if they're all tight. Because it's not tight, I can move those other rows out of the way. And it's the exact same pattern we did on the other ones, it's just this pattern has more beads in it. So my long bead pattern is seed bead, 3 check fire polish, and a seed bead. And now my crossover bead is going to be one of these leaves. So if you decided that you wanted leaves on every one of these, you would actually have to do that on the second row that you make. These ones would have to be your leaves. So it definitely takes some planning ahead, which is why I suggest if you want to get creative with your design, like I'm doing here, make one of these first. It's what I did, and I had this sitting on the table in front of me, and I kept referring back to it saying, oh, okay, that's there. Oh, so that's part of the second row. Oh, okay. So, yeah, so you don't confuse yourself. So then it's the same pattern. We're just changing which beads we're using. We're using more and different ones. So let's see, make sure I got that right. Yep. 131 leaf, 131. Very good. And now I'm going to go through again this crossover bead that only has one wire going through it. And repeat until you get to the other end. Okay, so I finished my stringing and I added my multi-strand connector to one end, and I'll show you how to finish it on the other end. You might notice that the bracelet's a little shorter than before because I realized that what I had with the findings I had was going to be too big for a bracelet for me, so I removed some of the beads and made it shorter. You'll want to double check that before you finish off your piece, otherwise you'll have to restring everything. We'll start in the center. That makes it easiest to keep from having things twisted and not aligned. You'll want to tug on each of these wires and make sure that they are pulled up snug, that there's no slack wire anywhere in there. That's looking good. So we'll start in the middle, and we'll treat these two middle wires as one and add a crimp over both of them. Then add your finding and make sure for the second side that it is lined up. So if it has a right and a wrong side, you want to make sure that it's lined up the way you want it to go. Send both wires through the middle loop, and both wires go back through the crimp. If you're using particularly thick wire, you might need a bigger crimp. And hold on to that wire and hold on to your finding and pull them apart. Just snug that up. Now, like I've told you before, you don't want it super snug. In this case, you want it fairly snug, but we are going to cover those with crimp covers. So you can see that you're going to need a little bit more room than that. So just back it out enough so you have room to put your cover in there. I'm using my one-step crimper because I love it, but you can just use regular crimping pliers. And if you want to know how to use those, or these actually, I'll link to both videos. I'm using the one-step crimper, there we go, and regular crimping pliers. Always, always, always give it a tug. I mean, how much force do you want your bracelet to be able to withstand? Well, make sure you give it a good tug and know that it can withstand that much force. I have heard that dreaded sound in the middle of the store, rattle, 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 ping, 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 as all of my beads go rolling about. It's not a fun sound. And then you wonder, can you scramble on the floor and gather up your 50 cents worth or $10 worth, or how, you start calculating how many beads are there, how much did I pay for them, how long will it take me to find them crawling under the counters. I like to use crimping pliers for putting on crimp covers. It's got little rounded slots which hold it perfectly, and then you can pop it over that crimp, squeeze gently to close. They make crimp cover closers, which I've done a review on. I'll link to it. I think it's a terrible tool. I just thought it was super annoying to use. Now let's once again make sure we have everything lined up. So I've got my finding on this end, right side up. So we'll flip that, make sure it's going the right way. Yes, okay. And then repeat. In this case, it'll just be a single wire. If you do more than 3 strands, you will find that you'll have the bars in the middle will have 2 strands on them. Okay, we're going to make sure this is going the correct way. So I'm going to send that through from the back. Oops, back through the crimp. Crimp it, add your cover, add a clasp to one end and a bit of chain to the other end, and you're done. Oh, now that's really pretty. I absolutely love it.